He said exactly the right thing. Not just once. Not just on a good day. Every single time. He remembered the small detail you mentioned once in passing, the thing you loved as a child, the dream you had quietly given up on, the wound you carried that you had never told anyone else. And he brought it back to you like a gift. Like proof that he saw you in a way nobody else ever had. He finished your sentences. He felt what you felt before you said it. He liked everything you liked. He believed everything you believed. He was everything you had ever described when you imagined what the right person would feel like. And you thought, finally. After everything. Finally. But here is what nobody told you. He was not finding you. He was building you. Every detail you shared was a data point. Every vulnerability you revealed was a tool he filed away for later. Every time you told him what you needed, what you had always been missing, what had always hurt, what you had always hoped someone would give you, he was taking notes. Not because he loved you. Because he was constructing the most convincing version of love you had ever experienced. Tailored specifically, precisely, surgically to you. And by the time you realized something was wrong, by the time the person who seemed to know you better than you knew yourself began to disappear and be replaced by someone cold and critical and unrecognizable, you were already so deep inside the bond he had built that leaving felt like losing yourself entirely. This video is going to change how you understand what happened to you. Not to make you feel foolish. Not to make you distrust everyone who has ever been kind to you. But to give you something that was taken from you without your knowledge or your consent. The truth. Before we go any further, I want to plant 4 questions in your mind. 4 questions that have probably haunted you since the relationship ended. How did he know exactly what I needed to hear, before I even said it? Why did everything feel so real and so right so fast, and then fall apart so completely? How could someone who seemed to understand me so deeply not actually love me at all? And the hardest question of all, what does it mean about me that I believed it? Hold those questions. Every single one of them will be answered before this video ends. And the answers are going to reframe everything you thought you understood about what happened. Now I want to tell you about something that most people never learn. Something that is not taught in schools, not discussed in most therapy sessions, not covered in the articles about red flags and toxic relationships. There is a phase that happens before the love bombing begins. Most people know about love bombing. The overwhelming attention, the grand gestures, the intensity that moves faster than any healthy relationship should move. People have heard the term. They understand in theory what it means. But what nobody talks about is what comes before the love bombing. What comes before is the assessment phase. And the assessment phase is where everything that happens afterward is built. Before a narcissist love bombs you, they study you. This is not a casual observation. This is not the normal way that human beings get to know each other through conversation and shared experience over time. This is a deliberate, calculated, systematic process of identifying your psychological profile, your needs, your wounds, your values, your fears, your deepest desires, and then constructing a persona that matches that profile with extraordinary precision. Think about how the relationship began. Think about how interested he was. Not just politely interested the way people are when they are being courteous. Intensely interested. Asking questions that went deeper than anyone usually goes so quickly. Wanting to know about your childhood, your past relationships, what had hurt you, what you had always wanted, who you were before the world had a chance to change you. And you opened up. Of course you did. Because someone was finally asking. Because the attention felt like being truly seen for the first time. Because after years of relationships where you had to fight to be understood, here was someone who seemed to understand you effortlessly and completely. You thought you were being known. You were being mapped. Every answer you gave was information. Every story you told was data. Every time you said I have always wanted someone who understood this about me, or I have never been able to talk to anyone about this before, you were handing him the blueprint. The blueprint of exactly who he needed to become to make you fall in love with him. And here is what makes this so psychologically devastating once you understand it. He did not just perform love. He performed the specific love that only you would recognize as the love you had always been looking for. He did not just say kind things. He said the kind things that landed in the exact places inside you that had always been empty. He did not just show up. He showed up in the exact way that the people in your life had never shown up, filling the specific absence that you had carried so long it had started to feel like a permanent part of you. This is why it felt like a miracle. Not because it was real. Because it was custom-made. And a custom-made illusion is infinitely more convincing than a generic one. Now I want to explain something about how the human brain processes this kind of experience, Because understanding the neuroscience behind it is what finally removes the shame from what you went through. When human beings experience something that feels like the fulfillment of a deep and long-held need, the brain releases a cascade of neurochemicals that are almost impossible to overstate the power of. Dopamine, the chemical of reward and anticipation. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, released during moments of intimacy and connection. Serotonin, associated with feelings of well-being and significance. All of these together in concentrations that the brain does not typically produce in ordinary daily experience. This is why the early phase of the relationship felt unlike anything you had experienced before. It was not just emotionally intense. It was neurochemically overwhelming. Your brain was flooded with chemicals it associates with the fulfillment of its deepest evolutionary drives. Connection, safety, belonging, being chosen by someone who truly sees you. And when the brain experiences something that powerful, it does not evaluate it critically. It does not pause and question whether what it is experiencing is real or constructed. It simply registers, this is what I have been looking for. This is it. This is real. The brain was not wrong to feel what it felt. The chemicals were real. The experience was real. The feelings were real. What was not real was the source of them. And that is a distinction that matters enormously. Because many survivors of this kind of abuse spend years believing that they were foolish to feel what they felt. That they should have known. That something was wrong with them for being deceived. Nothing was wrong with you. You were deceived by someone who had studied how to trigger exactly those chemicals in exactly the right sequence. Someone who had learned, through years of practice, perhaps through a lifetime of learning how to read people and give them what they needed to gain their trust, how to simulate the specific experience that your specific psychology was most hungry for. You did not fall in love with a person. You fell in love with the most perfect version of what you had always needed, performed by someone who had no intention of maintaining that performance once the bond was secured. And now we need to talk about something that goes even deeper than the love bombing itself. Because the assessment phase, the studying phase, was not just about learning what you needed. It was about learning what you feared. Because here is the truth about how narcissistic manipulation actually works at its most sophisticated level. It is not just about giving you what you want. It is about making you afraid of losing it. Once he knew your wounds, the places where you had been abandoned, rejected, made to feel not enough, made to feel too much, he knew exactly where to strike when the time came to begin the devaluation. Once he knew your fears, the specific scenarios that activated your deepest insecurities, he knew exactly how to create those scenarios later in ways that would destabilize you and keep you working to regain his approval. Once he knew the story you told yourself about why past relationships had failed, that you were too emotional, too needy, too sensitive, not good enough at communicating, he knew exactly how to use that story against you. How to trigger you and then point to your triggered reaction as evidence that you were the problem. The map he drew of you in the beginning was not just used to love you. It was filed away to be used as a weapon later. And this is the part that takes the longest to process. Not just that he was not who he seemed, but that the intimacy you felt, the intimacy that felt more profound than anything you had experienced, was itself a form of surveillance. Every secret you shared became leverage. Every vulnerability you revealed became a future pressure point. Every moment you opened yourself up and felt truly seen was a moment that information was being collected and stored for strategic use. This is one of the most psychologically violating aspects of narcissistic abuse. Not just the eventual cruelty, but the realization that the intimacy itself was not safe. That the thing you thought was the foundation of the relationship, the deep mutual knowing, the extraordinary sense of being understood, was not mutual at all. He knew you. You knew a character he was performing. And processing that asymmetry, that fundamental inequality at the core of what felt like the most equal and connected relationship you had ever had, is some of the deepest grief work that narcissistic abuse survivors have to do. Now let us talk about the transition. Because most people who have lived through this experience can point to a moment when something shifted. When the person who seemed to know them so well began to change. And the transition from the love-bombing phase to the devaluation phase is usually not sudden. It is a slow dimming. First the texts become slightly less frequent. Then the warmth becomes slightly less reliable. Then there are moments of coldness that seem to come from nowhere. Moments of criticism that feel confusing because they contradict everything the relationship had been before. And your first response, because you are a person who was built by this relationship to believe that his approval was the measure of your worth, is to try harder. To be better. To be warmer. To be less sensitive. To say fewer things that seem to bother him. To shape yourself more carefully around his moods. To try to find your way back to the version of the relationship that felt so real and so right. And occasionally you get there. Occasionally the warmth comes back. He is briefly the person again, the one who knew you and saw you and made you feel like you had finally been found. And your brain floods with relief and dopamine and the desperate hope that this is real. That you had got through whatever was happening. That things were okay again. And then the coldness returns. And you try harder. This is the mechanism of devaluation. And it is specifically designed, whether consciously or through deeply ingrained behavioral pattern, to increase your emotional dependency while simultaneously destroying your self-worth. Because the more you try to earn back his approval and fail, the more you begin to believe that the problem is you. That the version of yourself that he loved at the beginning was the right version. That the version of you that keeps failing to maintain his warmth is somehow wrong, insufficient, not quite enough. You do not realize that the version of you he loved at the beginning was always an illusion he reflected back at you. That there was never a right version of you that would be enough. Because the devaluation was never about what you did or did not do. It was the next phase of the cycle. Running on schedule. As it always had. Now I want to talk about something that is almost never discussed in conversations about narcissistic abuse. Something that your experience with this kind of relationship reveals about your psychology, not as a weakness, but as a profound strength that was exploited. The reason you were so movable by what he did. The reason the love bombing worked so completely. The reason the custom-made intimacy felt so real and so right. Is not because you were gullible. It is because you have an extraordinary capacity for genuine connection. The depth at which you can be reached, the depth at which someone knowing your story, understanding your wounds, reflecting your values back at you can move you, is a direct measure of your capacity for real intimacy. People who cannot be moved deeply also cannot love deeply. People whose defenses are so high that no one could ever make them feel what you felt also cannot experience the depth of genuine connection that makes life meaningful. Your openness was not a flaw that made you a target. Your openness was the best thing about you, weaponized by someone who had learned how to exploit exactly that quality. And understanding this distinction is perhaps the most important work you will do in healing from what happened. Because the natural response after an experience like this is to close. To build walls. To decide that the openness that was exploited must be sealed off, protected, never allowed to make you that vulnerable again. And those walls will protect you from the wrong people. But they will also protect you from the right ones. The goal of healing is not to become someone who cannot be reached deeply. It is to become someone who has enough self-knowledge and enough experience of what genuine connection feels like versus what manufactured connection feels like to tell the difference. And that discernment, that ability to feel the difference between someone who is genuinely learning you and someone who is studying you, is something that can be developed. Something that grows precisely from having survived what you survived. But it requires you to first stop punishing yourself for what happened. To stop treating your openness as the problem. To stop deciding that the answer to being deceived is to become someone who cannot be reached. Because the person you were, the person who opened up, who shared, who believed, who felt, that person was not your mistake. That person was your gift. And the right person, the genuine person who comes with no agenda, no strategy, no carefully constructed performance, will receive that gift the way it was meant to be received. With equal openness. With equal vulnerability. With the kind of love that does not require you to be studied before you can be valued. Now I promised you 4 answers to the 4 questions I asked at the beginning of this video. Here they are. The first question was, how did he know exactly what I needed to hear before I even said it? He knew because he asked. Carefully. Strategically. In the assessment phase before the love bombing began, he created the conditions for you to reveal your deepest needs, your oldest wounds, your most private hopes. He asked questions that felt like genuine curiosity but were actually intelligence gathering. And then he used everything you told him to construct responses, gestures, and behaviors that were specifically designed to land in the places you had told him were empty. He did not read your mind. He listened to you tell him exactly what your mind needed and then he performed it back. The second question was, why did everything feel so real and so right so fast and then fall apart so completely? It felt real because the neurochemicals it triggered were real. The dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, all of it was genuine. Your brain was having a genuine experience of what it believes profound connection feels like. The speed was engineered. The intensity was deliberate. Moving faster than a healthy relationship moves is a feature of the love bombing strategy because speed bypasses the evaluation process. You do not have time to assess someone carefully when you are already neurochemically bonded to them. And it fell apart completely because what was built on performance cannot survive indefinitely. The mask requires enormous energy to maintain. And once the bond was secured, once leaving felt too painful, the performance was no longer necessary. The third question was, how could someone who seemed to understand me so deeply not actually love me at all? Because understanding and love are not the same thing. He understood you the way a locksmith understands a lock, not to care for it but to open it. The depth of his apparent understanding was not evidence of his emotional capacity. It was evidence of his skill. Genuine love requires vulnerability from both people. It requires the willingness to be known without the guarantee of being accepted. He was never vulnerable with you. He was strategic. And the absence of his genuine vulnerability, the fact that you somehow always knew more about him through what he revealed in controlled doses than he ever truly exposed, is one of the signs that what felt like intimacy was actually one-directional. The fourth question was the hardest one. What does it mean about me that I believed it? It means you are human. It means you have the capacity for deep connection that every human being is built to seek. It means you were hungry for the specific kind of love that was performed for you, not because you are naive but because that specific love was built from the raw materials of your genuine desires and genuine wounds. You believed it because it was built to be believed by you specifically. It was not a generic trick that anyone would have seen through. It was custom made from everything you told him you needed. And believing something that was designed specifically to be believable to you is not a reflection of your intelligence or your strength. It is a reflection of how precisely and how cruelly you were targeted. You were not fooled because you were foolish. You were fooled because you were human. And being human, with all the openness and hunger for connection and capacity for love that comes with it, is not something you need to apologize for. Not to anyone. Not even to yourself. Let me leave you with this. Somewhere inside you there is a person who has survived something that most people cannot understand. A person who opened their heart completely to someone who had studied exactly how to make that heart open, and then watched that person use the very intimacy they had shared as a weapon. That is not a small thing to survive. That is not something you simply recover from by deciding to move on. It changes how you see the world. It changes how you see people. It changes how you see yourself. But here is what it does not have to change. It does not have to change your capacity to love. It does not have to close you off from the possibility that genuine connection exists. That somewhere out there is a person who will ask about your wounds not to use them but to protect them. Who will learn what you need not to weaponize it but to meet it. Who will see you not as a psychological profile to exploit but as a human being to cherish. That person exists. And the work you are doing right now, the work of understanding what happened to you, of removing the shame from your own experience, of learning the difference between someone who is loving you and someone who is studying you, that work is what makes you ready for them. You were not broken by what happened to you. You were tested by it. And everything you needed to know about your own extraordinary strength is visible in the simple fact that you are still here. Still trying to understand. Still refusing to let what was done to you be the final word on who you are. Keep going. Subscribe to this channel because every week we go deeper into the psychology of love, healing, manipulation, and what it truly means to find your way back to yourself after someone tried to take you away from yourself. And remember this one thing above everything else I have said today. He studied what you needed. But what you needed was never wrong. What you needed was human. And one day, when the right person arrives, what you needed will finally be given freely, honestly, and completely. You deserve that. You always did.